Hi, everybody. My name's Razwan. I'm an assistant team manager at Bracknell Forest Council. So I'm here today to deliver a bit of a presentation about Black History Month. It's a subject I'm very passionate about. I'm an equality coordinator with the union as well as an organising steward and an equality ally at work. It's something I've been obviously passionate about for years, and it's really important for us all to kind of get a better understanding of Black History Month, but also equalities in general. So firstly, thank you for everybody who's going to take the time to watch this. Really appreciate that. Also, thank you for all the local authorities within the local authority fostering Southeast. It's really appreciated. So here we go. Now, this year's theme for Black History Month is around standing firm in power and pride. And those words, power and pride, are really central. It's a time to celebrate the achievements and culture and contributions of Black people, and an opportunity to learn and reflect and promote inclusion. Now, celebration is the key, and this is where it's really important to stand out from just generic, like, tokenistic gestures or emails, intranet with a few words on. The key is celebrating, and this is why this year's theme heavily focuses on that word as well, because it's important to celebrate. Now, there's key themes are built to that around, celebrating the resilience, the leadership, and cultural pride. It also marks the 60th anniversary of the Race Relations Act, which was obviously introduced back in 1965. It was the first UK law against racial discrimination in public places and making it incitement to racial hatred a criminal offence. This was a big step back then, and as you know, there were a lot of communal upheavals at that time, and the kind of racism kind of reached quite epic proportions. And also, the point of this month as well is to encourage everyone to stand firm in their identity and achievements. And for the people in particular who've kind of experienced racism, it's really important here for their acknowledgement of the hardships they've gone through. Now, standing firm in power and pride, how can you get involved? What can you do? One of the key things everyone can do is obviously attend local events and talks. A lot of local authorities have got events going on. I know in neighbouring Slough there's an event at the Curve with local Black artists. I know Basingstoke Council have been celebrating Black History Month really well for a number of years. They kind of begin the month with a ceremony outside where they raise the Black History Month flag. They shine a spotlight on key individuals who are Black within the community, mark their achievements, and they have a celebration as well in that sense, and invite staff, identify as Black, and kind of, share experiences, eat together, talk, really get to know each other. So, there's lots of good work out there, and no doubt more that I haven't heard about. So, please do share, what you're doing in your areas in particular. Love to hear from you about that. Also, learn about Black history in your own community. And this is why I was really impressed with what Basingstoke do in particular, because they really do go into their community. They've done work with local Black artists, businesses as well, Black-owned businesses, and kind of really got to know all these important people in their community, and how to kind of really tell their story. And supporting Black-owned businesses and creators is key as well, and that's why really, hats off to Basingstoke. And again, the key message is, let's celebrate, learn, and stand together in power and pride. That's the key focus for Black History Month 2025. There's a real keen sense to move on, not just, tokenistic celebrations or, lip service, but really meaningful stuff. So before we go any further, I think it's really important to know about the origins of Black History Month. It kind of goes all the way back to the beginning of last century, as it were, and it was established by Carter Goodwin Woodson. His parents, Mum and Eliza and Father James Henry Woodson were actually enslaved. And Carter, he's the first and only person to get a PhD from an American university whose parents were enslaved. He himself had a really challenging time getting an education. A lot of it was, being taught by other people, self-educating, and then getting into school, then eventually university, and obviously his thesis and PhD. He really, really strived hard to kind of really get ahead. And he actually is really interesting. He actually went and became the principal of his first school as well. Really inspirational story. And a lot of today's focus is on getting to know some of these historical figures and the impact they still have today. It's really, really important to kind of learn their stories and more about them. So Carter obviously put this event together. It was a week-long celebration, and it was also to bring attention to the contributions of Black people through American history. Then, in terms of at the time in America, for example, they adopted the second week of February. The reason this was adopted was because Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass, who greatly influenced Black American uh, population history, key events. They were born in February. Frederick Douglass, in particular, was an American social reformer, abolitionist, orator, writer, and statesman. He became the most important leader of the African American civil rights movement in the 19th century. Again, I could spend hours talking about him. He is somebody whose life is worth celebrating and really worth learning more about. And certainly we don't hear much about him today here, but it's really important kind of to learn more. He again had a challenging upbringing and brought about so much change. And again, it comes back to the original theme of pride and power. You know, he's really proud of his roots and what he'd achieved. Now, in the UK, obviously, we're celebrating Black History Month, and in October, there's a shift in there. One of the key things about Black History Month in the UK in particular is it kind of really took off more so around the time of the kind of Windrush scandal, how that was coming out. It was in 1976 it became known as Black History Month generally. And back then there were a lot of social upheavals, particularly in Brixton, as people may remember the Brixton riots. And I'll touch upon that later. One of the key things is there was a report published recently. It was actually put together during the previous Conservative government, but they refused to publish it. And the Labour Party's manifesto included publishing this report. It was published, but it didn't get a lot of attention, unfortunately. However, the Guardian really did kind of go into quite a lot of detail about it. It's really important because it showed that the historical roots of the Windrush scandal, and that from 1950 all the way up to 1981, every single piece of immigration or citizenship legislation was designed, at least in part or full, to reduce the number of Black people allowed to live and work in the UK. Now, that's really significant. And again, when we go back to the Windrush in particular, people were encouraged to come to the UK to help, with the post-war reconstruction. Yet then, subsequently, all the legislation is actually to minimise their numbers. And that's really upsetting and sad, actually, because people have kind of, invested the years of their life here to build the country, and then they've never really been accepted. And that's why the Windrush scandal, it can't be underestimated just how bad it was and how impactful on people's lives. There were people who'd kind of missed out on citizenship, people who were deported when they were in their 50s, 60s, 70s, the later years in life after having, sacrificed their lives in the UK to work here. And it was deeply rooted in racism. That's the reality, and that still goes on. So, moving along, thought I'll throw up a couple of pictures. There on the left, as you know, the Windrush. What a lot of people don't actually know was that it was actually originally called the MV Monte Rosa. It was actually a German ship, and it was used to transport Germans to South America, Latin America at the time. And eventually it was seized and turned into, a vessel to transport people. It was still transporting people. It was actually an ocean liner. Um, and this photo goes back to 1948 when the Windrush arrived at the port of Tilbury. At the time, there were 1,027 people on board, plus two stowaways as well. And they all kind of came to answer the call of, coming to the UK to help rebuild post-war. Because as you know, 1945, Second World War ended, and then the whole recovery phase was going on, and there was a shortage of labour. Um, so that's why it was kind of very upsetting for people from this generation, because many of these people didn't get the citizenship that they'd hoped for. As well as people from the West Indies, the Caribbean, there was also people from like South America, Latin America as well. And that's something people don't often see. Um, Predominantly it was males, but there were females as well. The second picture is a more recent one, and there's a different sort of arrival. Um, and these images kind of they conjure up different beliefs within people, and that's what part of today is about, addressing some of the biases, conscious, unconscious. Just looking at the images on the right, some people are smiling. There's a thumbs up. Others looking down. One gentleman sat at the back. It's just almost has a look of despair, like almost relief. People don't realize just how dangerous these journeys are. And there's a lot of coverage in the media, from really racist views, such as, oh, well, these are young fighting age men, invading the UK, to why aren't there any females? Why aren't there any elderly people? Why aren't there any little kids in there? And unfortunately, the reality is these journeys are physically very demanding. I'm not in the best shape. Um, I could lose a few pounds, but I would struggle on this journey. I doubt I could get this far. Um, so that's a lot more of the context. But the point is, everyone has come through some sort of hardship. Some of these people have come through from war zones, some from countries hit by famine, poverty, and we'll come to that later. But it's just to kind of show the views and the mixed views and how that these different passages to the UK, in essence, both by sea, on vessels of sorts. So yeah, just think about that. So Black History Month 2025. Now there's a really good, quite a few good resources out there at the moment. One of my particular one's favorites is a website completely devoted to this and some of the work around the UK. And it's called blackhistorymonth.org.uk. They do like amazing work every year, lots of good resources on there. And this year's their kind of resourcing work focus on two key aspects. One is recognizing the black men and women who have stood on the front lines for Britain, um, in World War One, World War Two. It's often something that's quite forgotten by a lot of people, just who kind of fail to kind of see just how crucial a role people from the African subcontinent, from the Caribbean, played, along with others, from the Indian subcontinent and Southeast Asia as well, who supported Britain within the war. So they've kind of highlighted a few stories of a few people, and again, people are welcome to kind of learn more about these heroic people. We've got David Clementson, who's a Cambridge-educated Jamaica and served as a commissioned officer in First World War, which in itself was a rare distinction for, somebody who's black to be a commissioned officer. He also saw frontline service before his death, sadly, in 1918 during the First World War. There's Richard Dickey Barr, a Royal Navy veteran, who had a very long career in the Navy, and he kind of sailed across the world, and made a lot of, friends along the way, and fought for Britain, defending Britain. There's also Lillian Bader, who's one of the first black women in Britain's armed forces. She trained as an instrument repairer in the WAAF. For those who don't know what that is, that's the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, and that was during the Second World War and keeping aircraft ready for combat. There was also Walter Tull. He was actually a professional footballer who became a commissioned officer in the British Army during the First World War. He led his men on the Western Front, and again until he died in 1918. His football career began with Clapton Amateur Club, but then he went on to be signed by Tottenham Hotspurs in 1909. So, at the time it was the first division, Premier League club, which was a big deal. Sadly, he again tragically, died, sacrificed in the First World War. Johnny Smith, RAF navigator, Second World War, who flew a lot of hazardous missions across Europe. He was also, his plane was shot down, he was held prisoner, and he went through all those hardships as well as a prisoner of war. And then after the war, he played a number of distinguished key roles across the UK. There's also Ulrich Ross. He was actually the most decorated West Indian serviceman of the Second World War. Again, flew a whole range of RF missions and had a very big diplomatic career as well. And these are just six of, tens of thousands of people who kind of fought in the wars, and also, sacrificed. In fact, I'd say hundreds of thousands if you count First World War and Second World War together. And so this is why when we talk about equality, these people who sacrifice their lives for Britain, yet were then treated, like second-class citizens, well, not even given citizenship. So this is why the power of Black History Month can't be underestimated. And along with the power and pride and the pride in serving for the country is also the power in protest. It's something that is often overlooked, and especially black activists who have spoken out and stood firm, demanded change, from organising boycotts, leading campaigns, building networks, challenging systems that denied, justice. It's all come through protest, and that's why, again, the power of protest can't be underestimated. At a time when, sadly, even the government's looking to limit those protests. I mean, protests today are very kind of planned, choreographed, set routes, set times, attend, disperse, can't do this, can't do that, very kind of, already very heavily controlled, but there's also measures in place now and work happening to even reduce them even further. Yet it's the tragedy is it has taken protests to bring these rights in. And then the argument is, if you don't want protests, then address the issues. That's the kind of underlying point. So we've got Olive Morris, radical organiser and member of the British Black Panther movement. The Black Panthers were founded in 1966, and they aimed to combat police brutality. They were obviously founded in America, but they had chapters in the UK and other places as well. Paul Stevenson, leader of the 1963 Bristol bus boycott. You can't really underestimate the Bristol bus boycott because it was quite shocking, actually. At the time, Bristol had a population of about 3,000 people from the West Indies. Most of these people served in the military as well and had links to the armed forces. And then they kind of, after post-war, settled in Bristol. Yet the Bristol Bus Company refused to employ black or Asian staff as bus crews, just refused, pure racism. And then inspired by obviously Rosa Parks and stuff. And from America, they decided to obviously have a boycott campaign, which really worked. You've also got Roy Hackett, civil rights leader, whose direct action in Bristol again transformed the city's transport policy and became a catalyst for national change. Because obviously this racism wasn't just limited to Bristol, and this was obviously in the 1960s, not that long ago. Then we've got Altheria Jones-LeConte. She was a scientist and leader again in the British Black Panther movements. She had exceptional organisation skills and built a range of community programs and inspired generations with the language of resistance. Again, very important, especially when you are oppressed and, are having to take action for your rights and equality and to be treated the same as others. And we've got Claudia Jones as well, who's a journalist, organizer, and visionary. She founded the West Indian Gazette and launched Britain's first Caribbean carnival, blending culture with protest and empowerment. So that was a big thing, and it still is today. It's morphed into obviously Notting Hill Carnival, which is world renowned. And then last but not least, we've got obviously Mavis Best. Very much an unsung hero. So I'm going to talk about her a bit more next. But she spearheaded the Scrap the Sus campaign and united communities to stop the racist stop and search laws. So a bit of a focus on Mavis because her kind of background really, really inspired me. We're all probably familiar with the stop and search legislation, and obviously how it's abused. It still continues to be abused by the police, as there's disproportionately high numbers of black children who are stopped and searched. It can be very, disturbing for young people to suddenly be stopped. Not too long ago, there was a case where a young girl in school was strip searched by police. And that was really, really damaging for her and others. And it was basically back in 1981. The Sus law, it goes back to the much further to 1824 Vagrancy Act. So that was back in 1824. So that act was passed around Vagrancy Section 4. And then it became the Sus law, where basically gave powers for the police to just stop anyone who they suspected might have an intent to commit an arrestable offence. The suspicion, obviously, is better known as racial stereotyping, and that's what it was. It was just pure racism. People would be kind of targeted based on their race, or they looked suspicious, or they dressed suspiciously, or suspicious haircut, or suspicious way they were walking. Really, really, really kind of low benchmarks there. And it reached fever point, especially in the 70s, with the National Front, which is a racist far-right group, staging provocative marches in areas predominantly with a higher black community, Lewisham being one of them. And in 1977, they did another one of these marches, and people would argue protected by the police, and that obviously resulted in a lot of tensions and kind of a lot of disproportionate force against black people, especially youth who were kind of upset by what they were witnessing. The use of sus intensified in this climate, and it just got worse. And then in April 1981, after years of campaigning, anger boiled over. And there was a lot more rioting. People are familiar with it. They call it Brixton Uprising, Brixton riots. Again, that's a whole separate session, but that was really, really impactful. And in later in life, Mary said that she explained basically that it wasn't the result of sudden government goodwill that changed things. She argued that it was because campaigners forced the authorities to listen. And that's why the power of protest is so important, and kind of organising and meaningful actions to address these issues. Sadly, these issues still continue. The data speaks for itself, speaks volumes. Just thinking back just recently, there's the athletes, Bianca Williams and Ricardo dos Santos. Bianca was represented Great Britain. Ricardo was the 400-meter record holder, Portuguese, and they had their baby in their car, and they were stopped in Maida Vale by the police because they were suspicious of them driving in their BMW, and then suspicious apparently of his cannabis smell. That's one that's kind of cited often. And then, Bianca was arrested, put in handcuffs with her baby there. It's horrific. The video footage is disturbing as well of that arrest, but it just shows you that even now it's happening. Even, famous athletes aren't kind of spared from that. So this is why it's still ongoing. And so even we think, oh, historic 1981, 40, 4 years ago, but actually it's still going on. So where does all this end, really begin from? What's underlying behind this, especially, in the UK, some of these challenges? And to kind of learn more about that, we need to go further back. So it's going to put this map up. I'm going to ask people, does anyone know what this is a map of? So have a think. What do you think this map represents or represented? Because there is a historical connection. So those that haven't guessed, this map represents the British Empire. As you can see, it's stretched across the globe. You can see Britain there. The map itself as well is quite interesting because in reality, Africa landmass is much bigger than it is on the map, and Britain is actually much smaller. So that was something else that happened quite a lot in the colonial era. People from India will tell you about how in textbooks they'd have a map of Britain on one side of the page, enlarged, and then a map of India on the other side of the page, trying to give the false impression that they were similar size. And I know a lot of colleagues who then later kind of realized the difference and were kind of shocked. But it was one of these kind of tactics. Most of the other parts of the world were colonized as well, with Dutch, Portuguese, German, Belgian, colonizers as well, Spanish. Now, that brings me to the next point, colonialism. And what a lot of people don't realize is just how entrenched this is rooted in colonialism, and that you can't really understand Black History Month until you actually understand colonialism. Now, colonialism is the policy or practice of acquiring full or partial political control over another country, then occupying it with settlers, exploiting its economically, so that's exploiting its resources, whether it's minerals, land, or farming to produce certain things. One of the biggest tragedies linked to that was in India, when the East India Company, or Britain, basically were forcing people in India to produce cotton, which then they'd turn into garments, sell, and they weren't able to produce enough food for themselves. And later the Bengal famine happened, and over 3 million people, that's the estimate, died. So it had a big impact on people. It also, as well as environmental degradation, which we can still see today through extraction of minerals. Today it's, before it was gold and diamonds, and today it's like the rare earth minerals like cobalts, lithiums, palladium, all these kind of used in smartphones, smart cars, things like that, which a lot of people in the countries where the actual resources come from can't actually enjoy. It also results in spread of disease, economic instability, ethnic rivalries as well, especially to divide and rule mentality. And again, going back to the definition of colonialism, it's about exercising political control. So often certain people are put in those positions, and they're kind of, deals are done with them. That obviously leads to a lot of corruption, bribery, things like that as well, and a lot of human rights violations with the lack of free, fair, democratic elections, with the lack of an opposition political party as well in many of these countries. The negative impact of colonialism had resulted in systemic racism, cyclical poverty, economic inequity, violence, and loss of language and culture. The loss of language is really important because it is, it borders on ethnic cleansing as well, because that's you're deleting and wiping away a certain ethnicity. And it still goes on. One of the recent forums that has come up is in Northern Ireland, with the positive actions of reintroducing the Irish language, as is in mainland Ireland. Suddenly people are incensed, uproared by this, but that was the indigenous language. Like in Wales, the Welsh language is there, the signs are there as in dual language, literature in dual. There's a real push to bring back the Irish language in obviously the occupied Northern Ireland. And so that's really important as well. And it kind of shows how it still goes on today. A lot of it can also be seen in, say, like, the modern day, the programming of computers and stuff. A lot of it is in English. Some countries just last week, there were riots across Morocco. It was a former French colony. A lot of people want to ditch the French language as a second language and focus on English because of better opportunities. So this is why it still goes on. It's still a big contentious issue around the world. There's only 3 countries in the world that have never been wholly colonized. I don't know if anyone can guess. One is Japan. But again, people can argue because after the war, America has kept military bases in Japan. So that is a form of occupation, but officially they're leased. Korea as well, but again, North and South separation. Different influence in the North, different influence in the South. And then Thailand is another one which has never been colonized in its history. So very few countries in the world when you think there's like 200 odd countries. What's also really important at the moment is to really understand the British Empire. I actually studied history here, even did an A-level in history, and beyond kind of Henry VIII, there's not really much else that we covered in about the UK or the British Empire. Funny enough, we touched on the Romans, Egyptians, and even the Ottoman Empire in detail, but not the British Empire. So there's a research and sort of literature to help people understand that better. This is called a story of now, why we need to talk about British Empire, produced by Shalina Jan Mohammed, shortlisted for an award back in 2024. Really good book, well worth reading. It kind of talks about, again, the Windrush generation, the Commonwealth, and why it's important to talk about British history in the past as well. Another good book, especially aimed at younger readers, is this one, Stolen History, Truth About the British Empire and How It Shaped Us. Produced by Sathnam Sanghera. He also wrote another book called Empire Land. Again, really good. This one's designed for people aged 9 and plus, because it's very readable. It covers, it's a good start. In fact, it's quite a big topic, but it's a really good start. It really simplifies some of the past and the history context, but also how it continues to impact today. And another good book, this is a bestseller. It's produced by a politician who I believe is also an Oxbridge graduate, Oxford University, I think. Shashi Tharoor is a politician in India, and he wrote a book called Inglorious Empire: What the British Did to India. And he argued how India was the second richest country in the world after Britain, but after colonization, it became one of the poorest countries in the world. And then how that inequality and the system set up back then to maintain control still breed discrimination, inequality within India. Really, really interesting book. Um, he challenges the notions, like, for example, there's a lot of things around, oh, well, Britain built railways and really helped the country. Yet he'll argue in evidence that the railways were built to loot the country quicker, to steal the resources quicker. So it wasn't about helping the indigenous people. Um, it also touches on the massacres of unarmed protesters, the institutional racism, and again causing millions to die of starvation. So whilst, say for example, Winston Churchill is celebrated in Britain, around the globe, especially in India, he is seen as, a mass murderer, for creating the situation where millions of Indian people starved in relation to the Bengal famine. Winston Churchill also had, white supremacist views. He was a racist by definition, and that's something, again, people can struggle to comprehend sometimes, especially from the British perspective. And this is why, again, what Black History Month does, it kind of helps people challenge these notions, and actually challenge the current versions of history, and actually put a more of a critical context on things. So yeah, so I'd really obviously encourage people to kind of do that wider reading, because the only way you can understand Black History Month is actually doing that wider reading, the wider learning. All these three books are really, really good, well worth reading. So yeah, so do get onto them. Um, there's also a lot of other resources out there as well. A lot of good podcasts. If anyone is interested in more details, please obviously do get in touch. Thank you.